Hi, my name's Shauna Winram. I'm a PhD candidate in the School of Philosophy at the Australian National University. And the title of this talk is Exploring Psychosis in the Context of Global States of Consciousness. Imagine you're the second coming and your thoughts are being heard. The future of the planet depends on your thoughts remaining pure. If the pride wells up, the world will be cast into Armageddon. You keep thinking, it's me. But when that happens, you hear a crowd booing in your head. Your thoughts are being heard, and you must remain humble. Sounds in the environment are responses to your thoughts. If you have a bad thought, you hear a siren in the distance. Sometimes you can hear the sound of car horns beeping. This is a positive sign. It means that the elders, the beings who are guiding you, are sending you a signal, telling you they're with you, protecting you. The beings are with you, jumping into the bodies of the people around you. The doctor in the hospital talks to you and his personality changes depending on which eye you look into. In one eye, he's part of the initiation and you can hear the cheering and booing. In the other eye, he's just some person unaware of the enormous process taking place, unaware that the earth could plummet into Armageddon. You know that you're the second coming. You know that the fate of humanity rests on your shoulders. It depends on you thinking small, staying humble. It depends on you successfully completing this initiation test, reaching the end, and finding the souls who are guiding you. This describes my second psychotic episode that happened when I was 23 years old. And my thesis is the result of a journey where I've tried to make sense of this episode and two others like it that happened in my 20s. I approach psychosis in a different way to the dominant biomedical model. So the biomedical model tries to understand the causes of mental disorders in terms of imbalances in neurotransmitters and brain dysfunction, etc. Whereas I look at the ways that consciousness varies during psychosis in the hope that this will shed light on the sort of experiences people have when psychotic. So I take the first person experience of psychosis seriously. The colloquial term madness refers to very profound and fundamental human experiences. And if we want to understand disorders like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, then it's important that we listen to the experiences of those who have been mad. But beyond this, a rich understanding of humanity requires that we listen carefully to what those who have been mad have to say. My work is interdisciplinary. Firstly, it sits within the framework of phenomenological psychopathology. Phenomenology refers to the study of the structure of human consciousness. Consciousness refers to our first-person subjective experience and includes things like sensations, perceptions, emotions, etc. Psychopathology refers to the study of mental disorders. So phenomenological psychopathology refers to the study of the first-person experience of disorders like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression, etc. I also draw heavily on the science of consciousness literature, specifically work by Tim Bain and Jakob Hovey. So these philosophers argue against the idea of different ways of being conscious being understood in terms of levels. So different ways of being conscious, like the normal waking state, REM, dreaming, states of being under light anesthetic. They suggest we call these global states, and these vary from one another along multiple dimensions, or what I term domains of consciousness. My research involves two main components. Firstly, an online survey with 64 participants who've experienced psychosis. And secondly, 16 one-hour interviews where I ask participants to describe their psychotic experiences. All participants were over 18 and not currently in hospital or experiencing significant distress or psychotic symptoms. The first part of the survey measured 13 domains of consciousness, and these included level of arousal, number and quality of contents, the structure of consciousness, and this included how time, attention, and the self were experienced, and the functions of consciousness. And this included how accessible the contents were to memory, decision-making, and behavior. These domains can vary. For example, the number of contents is known as a bandwidth, and in the normal waking state, it's suggested that we can contain about 4 chunks of information in working memory at a given time. But this might expand on LSD and contract under light anesthetic. So because these 13 domains can vary, we should be able to rate them on a scale. And that's what I've done in part 1 of the survey. I've rated these domains from 1 to 7, where 4 is equivalent to the normal waking state. I use statistical analysis to answer my first research question, which is how does consciousness during psychosis differ to the normal waking state? And the results were that 10 of those 13 domains were significantly different during psychosis. And these included level of arousal, number and quality of contents. The control of attention was different, though the spread of attention wasn't. Time seemed different, though time didn't seem faster or slower. The self seemed different. Decision-making and behavior were different, though memory wasn't. The interviews also suggest that participants experienced the domains of consciousness in different ways and consciousness in general in different ways. For example, participant 4 said it felt like it was a revelation, that sense of things starting to make sense and all this information is coming. And participant 5 said it's like the inner world is bigger than the outside world. It's like you've gone within, you've gone somewhere else. Importantly, participant 5 noted that being on a locked ward under heavy sedation for 2 weeks also affected how they experienced time, familiarity, and consciousness. They said, a psychiatrist looks at you in the ward and says, yes, that's psychosis. But for me, some of what you're asking about was actually the effects of treatment. Okay. Now, my second research question is, do the general facts about consciousness during psychosis that we've just discussed mean that psychosis is a distinct global state of consciousness? Now, a global state is a second-order conscious state that consists of a natural range for the various domains of consciousness. We don't know how many or what domains are relevant when coming to define global states, but let's say there are 20 domains and you can rate them from 1 to 7. If a subject's in a global state, they're going to rate from 1 to 7 for those 20 domains. And presumably, we change global states when our ratings for these domains change in some predictable way and fall within another natural range. Now, set a global state is a second-order state. An example of a second-order state is the disposition to dissolve. So salt and sugar both dissolve in water, but they have different chemical makeups, so their causal or physical story for dissolving is different, but their second-order story for dissolving is just that they're both dissolvable. Okay, so in the case of conscious states, such as the normal waking state, this doesn't have any specific content. So I could walk outside and stub my toe, or I can lie on my recliner chair and watch Netflix. In both these cases, the content of my experience is quite different. However, these experiences will belong to the same second-order state when the value for the domains fall within a given natural range. So it's this second-order state that determines this natural range for the various domains. And recall this second-order state, those domains include the information about the structure and function of consciousness as well, not just the number and quality of contents. So this is a more formal definition of a global state. A subject S is in a global state C if and only if S is in the second order state of being in some conscious states whose values on the domains of consciousness fall within a natural range. Okay, so if we want to know if psychosis is a distinct global state, we're asking, do all my participants fall within the same natural range for these various domains or the 13 domains that are measured? So to determine this, I used hierarchical cluster analysis with SPS software, and this took my sample of 64 and they were broken into 3 distinct clusters. And I named these clusters based on the scores for the domain. So the participants in the normative cluster scored most closely to the normal waking state along the majority of domains. The participants in the high arousal cluster scored highest for arousals, and the participants in the low function cluster scored lowest for memory, decision-making, and behavior. These clusters also differed in terms of diagnoses. So the high arousal cluster is in yellow here, and that scored highest for schizoaffective disorder and second for bipolar. And these are both mood disorders that involve mania. It scored lowest for depression, and interestingly, scored lowest for schizophrenia. The interviews also suggest that participants experience these domains in quite diverse ways. So in terms of level of arousal, participant 1 experienced low arousal and said, "I can sit for hours and stare. It really feels like my head is full of glue." And this was in contrast to participant 2 who experienced high arousal. They said, "I was definitely a bit more manic than I usually am, and I had a lot of problems with racing thoughts." Time was also experienced in quite dramatic ways. So participant 5 said things sped up. They said it was like a hyperdrive type of thing. Participant 6 said time seemed endless. They stated, "I was in the moment, and the moment never ended until I came out of psychosis." And participant 7 said things slowed down. The experience of the self varied. So participant 5 said, "My husband said when I'm in these states, it's really painful and awful, but I'm also very funny and childlike." And participant 6 seemed to lose their sense of self. They said, "I didn't know who I was. I knew I was me. I described myself to me as me, but I didn't know my name and I didn't know anything about me." Okay, so what does this all mean? Well, it could be that psychosis is not a distinct global state because the participants didn't have similar ratings regarding these various domains. But this may generalize to other states we think of as global states, like the normal waking state or REM curve. Or it could be that psychosis is a distinct global state, but I'm not measuring the relevant domains. But again, this could be a general problem. If we don't know what the relevant domains are for understanding a global state, we're going to be wrong about all states we think of as global states. Or it could be that psychosis is 3 global states and not 1. But again, this could generalize, and it could be that all states we think of as global states are going to fracture in this way into clusters. Or it could be that my definition is not capturing what a global state is. Now, there are several limitations with this work. I've mentioned we don't know what the relevant domains are for global states, and this is relevant when we try to understand psychosis. So the term psychosis refers to experiences that include hallucinations, delusions, disordered thoughts, etc. And we really need to factor in things like delusions when trying to understand psychosis. I also think how these domains are interconnected when a creature moves from one global state to another is really important, and the weightedness of the domains is important. For example, with my sample, they scored 5.19 for level of arousal during psychosis and 5.11 for complexity of contents. And this suggests that level of arousal has more explanatory power than complexity of contents when it comes to determining why psychosis is distinct from the normal waking state. Also, my interviews revealed experiences that participants had that weren't captured by the domains I measured. For example, pressure. But participant 2 said, "It was a lot of pressure thinking that everything is after you all the time." And participant 8 said, "I experienced it as just overwhelming pressure, and it's the kind of pressure that just breaks you. It's just awful and unrelenting, and it's very hard to communicate it to anyone who hasn't experienced it." I also had a conversation with Tim Bain, who was talking about the background feeling of global states. And this is like a mood. So in depression, it's like a worthlessness, or in the prodromal state leading to schizophrenia, it's like an unreality. And I haven't factored in this background feeling. So I've very literally taken these domains and tried to rate them or measure them. And I think this is a valid project. And I think there's more room for empirical work like this, but we need to factor this background feeling in as well. Okay, regarding the significance of the work, we don't really know the causal mechanisms for illnesses like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And this is a novel approach that relies on first-person experience and the science of consciousness. So it could lead to different research approaches and have implications for treatment. But also, recent work in the science of consciousness has suggested this concept of a global state, which presupposes a multidimensional approach to consciousness. And while there's been some work trying to understand how different dimensions or domains vary in different global states, there's not a lot of empirical work done in this area. And yet this is vital for understanding consciousness. And it also has widespread clinical implications in terms of understanding and treating brain depression, psychosis, brain disorders, etc. Okay, finally, psychosis may not be a distinct global state given my definition, because if it was a distinct global state, participants would have similar ratings regarding these domains. This doesn't seem to be the case in the surveys or the interviews. However, this may generalize to other states we think of as global states, such as the normal waking state and REM dreaming. So it could be that the concept of a global state is not very helpful in the emerging science of consciousness. It also could be that my definition of a global state needs revision. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Oops. Okay, I have to stop sharing this. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Take care.